And we are live. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and answering the important questions you need answered to make the right decisions in building out your digital learning ecosystem. First of all, I am joined by Chris Rainey again. Even though we're broadcasting from my account, he's joining me again, host of the HR Leaders podcast. Thanks for being here, Chris, and for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
All right. And then we are joined today with Mark Atkinson. He is the CEO of Mursion. Today we are talking AI, VR, digital experience, all sorts of exciting stuff. And rather than just do the typical kind of throw over, hey, how are you doing, things like that, we thought it wouldn't be a good learning session if we didn't have a fun icebreaker. So my question for Mark to get things rolling, and he's prepared for this, so I'm not throwing him on the spot, is what is your favorite breakfast cereal and why?
Well, my breakfast passion is probably inversely correlated to the nutritional goals of people, our age. And so I've embraced my 16-year-old sensibility and cannot start a day without a bowl of Captain Crunch, which has, I can report, zero nutritional value as a cereal, but is absolutely delicious.
No natural nutritional value.
Exactly.
They put some stuff in it, right? Read the nutrition facts. There's stuff in.
Exactly.
Okay, so it doesn't bother you that it cuts the roof of your mouth?
Absolutely not. Anything that tastes like a graham cracker is good to go for me.
Okay. How about you, Chris? I'll put you on the spot. You said you don't eat cereal, but come on.
I do. I was just joking. I do eat cereal. I was just trying to mess you up on your first live show.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it.
No, I'm really boring. I have Weetabix. I'm not sure if you have the same name over there. So it's like wheat biscuits. Yeah. You just pour milk on. I'm not sure if you probably call it something else over there, but it's like
shredded wheat is probably shredded wheat. Probably do you do the frosted? Is it even frosted?
No, we don't have. I don't do frosted. I'm trying to be healthy, right?
I guess it's America. We put frosting on everything.
Everything. No, we do have frosted. Do we have shredded wheat with frosting on it as well? I just try to stay away from that.
You stay away from it. Okay. Well, Mark, I'm in your camp. I'm actually a huge fan. I like Captain Crunch. My favorite is Crunch Berries. So that's my delectable treat. Although when I'm being healthy, I'm boring too. Cheerios is like my healthy go-to. I love
for everyone listening, post your favorite cereal in the comments.
Yeah, right in the comments. Let's hear. Yeah, anybody watching?
People joining the stream later can be like, "What the hell is happening?
Why
is all these cereals?"
This was about VR, AR. And we're talking about breakfast cereal. No,
all I know is I have a body for virtual reality. That's all that proves.
That's a good excuse.
There you go. Which actually leads into the first question that I really wanted to get answered, and maybe it wasn't that you had a body for virtual reality, so you said, hey, I'm going to do this. But when you started down this path with Mursion and got into this space, first of all, what's a little bit about your background? Were you a tech person? Were you a learning person? What was that? And then I'll follow that up with my follow-up question. So a little bit more about your background.
So I actually was kind of in your world. My background was in network television. I was a producer for Peter Jennings for 10 years at ABC News in New York. I did long-form documentaries when ABC would interrupt regularly scheduled programming to bring you this event in Washington or Beijing. Or I spent a lot of time in Sarajevo during the war. I did a lot of sort of war correspondence and reporting for Peter. And while I was in television, I actually was approached by folks who were very interested in the idea of using video and online learning. This was back in the late 90s, and I launched an ed tech company called Teachscape, which pioneered the use of video to model what good teaching looks like in the classroom. And I led that company for a dozen years, and we subsequently sold it, and actually it was one of my investors at Teachscape that introduced me to the core technology that has become Mursion, to anticipate your next question, which was sort of how did we get into this?
You're anticipating it. You even know what I'm going to say before I say it.
Was that where you were going? Sort of how did this come about?
Well, because I was curious and one of the questions I always like to ask is, right, when people come up with these new tech solutions, clearly they saw a problem in the market or a gap, and they said, hey, this is where we were going. So I'd be interested in that journey from, video for showing people how to be better educators in the classroom to, this is a completely different shift, right? We're jumping out of the classroom. We're talking futuristic stuff here.
That's right. And and in fairness, I'd love to take all the credit for the idea, but it really the credit doesn't go here. The fact of the matter is that there was a team at the University of Central Florida, which is in Orlando, Florida, that and strategically located, just a stone's throw away from Disney, from Lockheed Martin, and from CENTCOM, three sort of very different institutions that care a lot about simulation. And if you look at where the federal government has been plowing investment dollars into pioneer the next generation of simulation technologies, the Orlando area is definitely one of them. And so the University of Central Florida, which has a robust research organization, had a project that had been underway for several years that my co-founder, Arjun Nagendran, was part of, where he and others in the computer science department were working with the School of Education to basically create a simulation platform where teachers or teacher candidates, folks in the university who wanted to become teachers, could practice the basic skills of managing a classroom, working with kids with disabilities, learning how to just set up a basic lesson without practicing on real kids. Yeah. And that's basically how this started. And it was in its early days kind of like digital puppeteering. In a sense, the idea was, well, we can't get real kids, so let's have somebody behind the scenes create fake kids and literally pull the strings to make their mouths move and their heads turn. And there were lots of wires and gizmos, but over time, and obviously Mursion has evolved this. Each year, another wire or gizmo is replaced by an AI script that algorithmically makes this happen. And so, we've moved from something that was very kludgy to something that is quite intelligent over time. But in fairness, Arjun and his colleagues at the University of Central Florida deserve all the credit. I just had the good fortune to meet them through an investor that thought the technology could be commercialized.
Okay. So this started almost Jim Henson-esque in some ways with puppets.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting way of putting it. In fact, a prototype of the technology that the university developed was called Geppetto. And for just that reason. I mean, and in a way, it was meant to learn, what exactly is possible here. And there's a big philosophical issue that undergirds our approach that the computer scientists at the University of Central Florida, and I think Mursion believes really strongly, and it has to do with the way simulations are done at a grand scale. And the concept in tech and in simulation is called human in the loop. And so what do I mean by that? If you were to actually go see the military war game, I think we have this Hollywood version that when we think simulation, we think two things. First, we think of the flight simulator that we've seen pilots go through. And the next mental model that comes to mind is the sort of the Pentagon with big screens and war gaming, like how we have global conflict and battle, the big battles happening. And if you actually have ever had the privilege of seeing that play out, the idea, it's not like some smart general pushes a keystroke and the whole game happens like a video game. What is actually happening is you have the smartest commanders in the room ordering the screens to do things. There is the intelligence of how battles are fought and strategized. The computer creates the reactions to the actions that they launch. Invade on the right, this flank. Launch this air attack. The sea patrol does X, whatever it might be that's going on. They are actually leveraging their commanders, and they are the human in the loop that drives the intelligence of the strategy. The computer simply automates and takes out the things that can be computerized and automated. And that same human in the loop philosophy is very much at the heart of what Mursion believes about soft skills, which is to say this, that while there are a lot of extraordinary things computers can do and artificial intelligence can do, and we do a lot of those things with artificial intelligence, the idea that a computer is going to have an emotionally intense conversation with you about a professional situation that you run into, an employee who is beyond a little bit upset at work that you have to calm down, a diverse cultural conflict that you might run into in the workplace, a customer who is just outrageously rude that you have to professionally handle. We know that computers can do a lot of things. Computers cannot simulate those kinds of intense emotional conversations without a human in the loop. And the fundamental premise of everything Mursion does is to blend what humans can do well and really enhance that by creating simulations that AI can produce in a virtual world that leverage those human emotional skills and general intelligence and create things that a learner thinks are exactly like what it feels like when you have that confrontation on the job.
Well, and what you're talking, I love the human in the loop, right? That phrase I think is really impactful. And just, in my experience in looking at, I don't know how many learning technology pieces I've been, when it came to soft skills, many times that to me always felt like the gap with some of these immersive technologies was when you took the human out of the loop, it felt like a bad video game. It was very just, okay, I know it was like taking an e-learning quiz, a bad scenario e-learning quiz, and now you just have this fake person that's kind of giving it back to you. And unless you have, and I don't know if somebody in the L&D space has this, kudos to you, but I don't know anybody who does, unless you had a true, Blizzard, Activision game design company building this stuff, it didn't feel authentic. And the reality with that is we don't have those kind of budgets. We don't have that kind of stuff. So then how do you do that? And the human piece, I've had the chance to experience Mursion, things like that. That to me was always the differentiator, was the fact you were interacting with a person. And the way I describe it is they're a superpower because that they have that AI behind it.
That's
Interesting.
Right. That's right. It matters a lot that you pick the right kinds of humans behind it as well. And we rely heavily on folks that have formal improv training. And if you've ever been through improv training, it is at the heart of it is developing a sense of empathy. And the empathy is the ability to have somebody recognize what they may not be doing as well as they would like to do it in a very supportive environment. It involves listening and probing and challenging in a way that creates opportunities to learn and be successful. And in many ways, what our customers are asking of us is to find ways to get managers to be more empathetic as human beings, that organizations, in order to work collaboratively, to be creative, to be innovative, they need to have an empathetic culture that lets people take turns, let their voice be heard, let their ideas surface. Those are skills that, whether it's technology or just the aggressive rate of growth that so many companies go through, we've lost a lot of that in the workplace. And they're skills that require practice and persistent practice to get better at. And our folks are incredibly good at it.
Okay. Well, I'd ask Mark, but a few people in the LinkedIn comment section said, what is the rationale behind having an avatar, and why not just have the human?
To coin another phrase that we believe deeply in is that in order for the learning to take place, there has to be this kind of suspension of disbelief. Otherwise, we're doing the thing that many of us have done in a lot of training that we hate, which is role play on a stage. So right now, let's imagine that the scenario is, I'll pick a customer that cares deeply about this. The scenario is you're a T-Mobile store and you have, a low-income African-American man who has just moved into his first apartment that wants to talk about, getting his new smartphone and tablet set up. And to coin T-Mobile's phrase, like, this guy is not a data plan. This is a customer that you're going to build a lifelong relationship with. Now, you want that person on the other side of the counter to treat him with all the respect and dignity he deserves. I can't role play that guy. Like, yeah. I can't persuade you that I'm that guy sitting here like that, but I can create a virtual reality experience that makes you feel in real time that you're dealing with that guy. And if the next character needs to be an elderly Asian woman, like, I can't morph myself instantaneously into that person, but I can immediately toggle to an avatar that gives you the real sense that you're dealing with that woman. And that's what technology can do. And we call that suspension of disbelief. It's actually what we know when we see a great movie, and it immerses you in the experience, right? That's why we want broader tech, more sense around, more, 4K or 5K. We want, and why VR is so compelling. It's also why great theater, when it really draws you in, is so compelling. Like, you lose the sense that you're not in the action. You feel like you're actually part of the action. And that's what VR can bring to this, that just being on a stage, two humans in a chair can't produce.
Okay. Well, and I know, right, from even just my personal experience, when it comes to role playing, and this is something that I've had lots of conversations with people about when it comes to role play, is when you're role playing with just, I'm role playing with Chris Rainey about how to do a podcast. It's not as authentic as being in the real situation because, right, I know it's Chris, and like you said, there's not that suspension of disbelief. And to me, even personally, that's always been a limitation of role play, is that other person can't pretend to be a customer because I know you're Bill and you're my colleague, and it's not really the same thing. And it is a little bit of a trippy experience. I can say that from personal experience with it. So One question I have with that on this, and this is where I'm interested in your thoughts, since you've been so much closer to it, because you talked about how this human in the loop is separating the uniqueness of human capability and then using technology to automate the rest. This is a hot topic in general in the industry. Do you see or anticipate that will change, or really no matter where it goes, do you always see that uniqueness of humans staying, at least to some degree unique, and machines will never be able to quite get there? And that's a very theoretical question, but
yeah, let's say.
Well, it's not that theoretical in the sense, and because there's a sort of a very spirited debate in the AI world going on just the topic you're discussing, which there's really two sort of technologies that you're asking about. One is, when will AI create generalized intelligence, which is the ability to do inferential kind of reasoning and thinking, and when will natural language processing be sort of real time and pure, so that when you give your iPhone to your kid, they can actually carry on a real conversation with it and not break it as soon as they ask us sort of a silly question, right? And I think we're in the camp that those things are a good ways away. Maybe they're coming, but they're not coming on the time horizon that we're building a big business. And in the meantime, the technology is moving so quickly that what the human does in the simulation no longer matters. So for example, in the original days, the software was only as good as the ability of the actor to throw their voice and morph their voice on their own. Now we have really sophisticated voice morphing technology. It can move gender and age. I can be a little girl. I can be an old man. I can be somebody from a different background. Eventually, we will be able to get dialogue and accent really down, because the technology is moving. That really hard problem to solve. Not there yet, but we're working really hard on that to get that to be the case. Obviously, you can transform my visual appearance. Increasingly, we can make that visual appearance look really, really realistic without triggering the so-called uncanny valley of VR that you've heard people talk about, where people get creeped out by the avatar, right? That's going to happen. We right now have a control system where the actor uses either keystrokes or a controller mechanism to trigger the emotions. But increasingly, AI will allow the software, the camera and microphone, to interpret what the actor's saying and render it in real time into the body language of the avatar as well. So all kinds of things where I would essentially be doing what you and I are doing right now, talking to my laptop, and that will actually render in real time, all based on AI. Now, what does that free up the human to do? Well, it frees up the human to sort of play a role that our clients want us to do more and more, which is to track whether or not the learner is using the strategies they want them to use, achieving the objectives they want to use, tracking to the body language and tone of voice of what's happening in the simulation, and providing feedback on what they did well and poorly so that they can get better in cycles. And that's a really high value use of the human in the loop in our simulation.
Okay. Do you need to get that?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So with this one, okay, so with the VR piece, because this is one thing that I think when people think virtual reality, a lot of times people are thinking, you know, you've got Oculus, you've got hand controls, you've got haptics, which can feel very overwhelming if you think about it from a learning and development standpoint. If you're a learning leader sitting there going, hey, we want to move into the VR space, that can feel as a barrier to entry to say, we just can't do that. So talk a little bit more, and I know this piece, but I'd like to hear from you what that looks like, because it's VR, but not in the sense that I think a lot of people associate when they think VR.
Yeah. So we basically are operating cross-platform. Fundamentally, we are a simulation platform, and we are an experiential learning sort of environment. People can do us in a headset. Most companies have not yet deployed these headsets at scale for the reasons you've described. So we deliver our simulations by way of laptops right now. We are being asked by more of our corporate learning clients, to be honest with you, to move it to mobile platforms where so much of learning is taking place right now, tablets. So for example, we have a few other telco companies where those guys who come into your house to install your set-top box, you know, they're walking around with an iPad or another tablet device, and they want to be able to do learning in their van when they pause and break. And so the marketplace is pushing for us to make these simulations work on smaller devices. At the same time, I mean, we really do believe that there are some experiences that are transformative in VR. Not all simulations require it, but there are some for which the emotional intensity or the atmospherics of where you're in. Let's say you're having a conversation where the environment itself is the distraction that keeps you from being, you know, sort of empathetic in the way you're interacting with somebody. VR lets you really produce all of that environmental distraction. So there are some things that we think are better for that. So we are operating cross-platform. We operate in VR. Very small number of people do that now. We operate a lot on laptops. A lot of people do that, and we're increasingly moving to mobile.
Okay. I wasn't aware that I didn't know that you could do it through the headset, do a truly immersive capability. So that's even more interesting to me, in that really you go the whole gamut there. So if you have that capability, you're going that path. Because I agree. I think there are situations where the environment you're in is such a factor for having that authentic experience that, you know, just sitting and looking at a WebEx or whatever, it's not quite the same.
Mark, okay. What feedback does the simulation give you? Because I've spent my entire career doing sales training, right? Role play. That's literally what I did for 15 years with a huge team of 50 sales execs, and that's what I'll do on a daily basis. And for me, the ability to be able to give that individual feedback on the spot during that role play was one of the most effective ways for me to train and develop them as sales executives. What feedback does the simulation give to the user?
So let me answer.
How does that work, should I say?
So I'll describe the experience that you would go through. Let's say your sales context is a good one. And you're walking through a classic scenario where your job as a sales representative is to overcome some basic customer objectives, objections.
That's a great one, because that's one of the main role plays I do a lot with sales teams.
Okay, so we would come in, and instead of seeing me here in my shirt, I would be your host, avatar. Imagine that, and I would say, okay, Chris, so here's what we're going to do. Today, you're going to meet in a minute. I'm going to leave the screen, and in is going to come Jane. She's the head of product at the organization that you're going to be talking to. And she's just had a bad experience with the kind of technology that your firm sells. She's reluctant. She's kind of a Luddite. Your job is going to be to make her understand that you've been successful implementing this 2 or 3 times. So I'd give you this kind of setup. You'd have any questions, you'd ask the questions, I'd get you comfortable. We'd say, pause, start simulation. We dissolve into, you're now in the place where the office where you'd really be having the conversation with Jane. Jane would sit down, she'd have her arms crossed, she'd be like, how did you get this appointment? How did you get on my schedule? And your job is to soften up Jane. And your objective is to get Jane to understand that your technology is an easy one. And Jane's job as an avatar is to ask all the hard questions that trip you up, and occasionally sort of push your buttons, like, I notice you're checking your Apple Watch there. Do you have another appointment you need to get to? Am I not worth the time? Her job is going to be to sort of push your buttons. And if you're really good, you'll get through it. But the odds are in many of our sims, you're going to say, oh, crap, busted, pause, can I stop? Let me go back and do that again. And then what happens is we dissolve back to the host who's been watching. It says, hey, so let me tell you what you did there. I noticed that, you got a little unnerved when she said this. Do you want to go back to that moment and do it over again? So the great thing in life, when we screw up those interpersonal conversations, we never get the do-over chance. So we're going to give you the do-over chance. We get the do-over chance. You get through it. You end successfully. You feel pretty good. That's part of the feedback, but that's not all. Then at the end, we record that thing. You can watch it. In order to actually go through the recording, we ask you to use a kind of a joystick with the arrows on your keyboard. Tell us when you thought you were nailing it in that sim. And tell us when you thought you weren't doing so well. And that creates a kind of readout on the video, which is very much like, if you ever seen in the political debates when they have the focus group in the side room and they're talking about, say what you like, when the candidate was saying what they like, give us the positive, pull back and give us the negative when you don't. And you see the sort of the meter go up and down, right? So what's been happening behind the scenes, you're going to do that. You're going to get this kind of readout. But what you don't know is that our controls, while the avatars are acting, the human behind is interpreting, is he nailing it? Is he missing it? Is he getting it? Is he missing it? And what we're really interested in is, in all conversations, we all have these moments when we're nailing. It's like the bad date, right? In that day, you're nailing it. She's laughing at your jokes. Everything's going really well. And then there are these moments where it just goes south. What happens in life and what gets us in trouble is when we think we're nailing it and we are really blowing it.
Self-aware. Yeah.
Exactly. So what we do at the moment, we give you that readout. And at that moment where there's this real discrepancy, where you thought you were nailing it and you were blowing it, now we have a whole lot of data we can tell you. These are the things that start to show up. Your speech rate got really fast at that moment. Your volume, suddenly you were shouting at her like, what the hell, and you didn't even notice. I do that, by the way. It's a terrible thought for the record. But, like that happened. Or like you kept checking your watch. Did you notice you weren't making any eye contact with her at that time? Or you kind of started crossing your arms or looking, or there were 2 or 3 people in the room and you kept looking at the guys. You didn't give the women the time of day. Like those kinds of things that are the visual cues that we are not being empathetic to the audience we're addressing. That's the data. We're trying to both show you in video, but then give you lots of data about how you were behaving when it didn't seem like you were connecting with the people you were interacting with. That's the analytics that we provide. That's the feedback that we're providing, in addition to the opportunities to kind of do it over again, if that's helpful.
That was really helpful, and yeah, that kind of brought it all to life for me. Obviously, I do know what you guys do, but I love that example, especially in sales, and I love the speed part, because one of the most common challenges of someone reading their script for the first time is they speak really fast because they're nervous, they're trying to get through it. So just having something like that giving you the feedback to slow down is something that I constantly have to say to people all the time in my sales team. So that's a really good example of how that works.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's one, because I in looking at some of the comments, I think this is, and I've even heard this in some of the discussions I've had about some of these new technologies is, well, people could do this, right? In theory, people could do this. You could try and replicate this with just people. And I think we talked part of my kind of counter back to that we talked about earlier, which is if I'm role playing with somebody, I can't be that elderly Asian woman, or I can't put myself in that without looking absolutely ridiculous or inappropriate to try. It's just not there. Where with the technology, you actually can become another person. But I think the other piece, and I'm curious if you can describe some of this piece, is in theory, I guess some could say maybe a good chunk of this you could do with people, but logistically, I feel like having run large L&D organizations, yeah, in theory, we could try and find subject matters from around the globe, and we could try and pull this together and skill them all up and make sure they're all doing things consistently, because that's, again, I think another challenge with role play is if you don't do the prep work for the people who are being those, assessors, what they catch, what they do, it's not going to be consistent at all. And then it's just a logistical nightmare. So how is just purely operationally Mursion helping tackle some of that stuff? Because that's a big inhibitor to me.
Yeah. I mean, so I think you said it very well. We work with companies that hire real actors to do discrete forms of role play, and it's super expensive. The actors have to go to a single location. All the learners have to fly in to be there. I mean, it's fairly expensive to produce. You need a facility. You need a lot of training. It's hard to get this right, and you can only serve a small number at a time. I mean, we get the sort of, if you think about the distance learning part of it, you can log in and do immersion anytime at home. Simulations tend to be powerful experiences in short doses. You don't spend an hour on it. You don't need to spend an hour on it. That intense conversation is going to usually boil down to somewhere between 7 and at the most 15 or 20 minutes, but they're usually these intense bursts. Why would you want to get people physically coming together to do all of that? And then once you agree that it's much better to do at a distance in lots of repetitive short cycles of doing it, then the question is it better to see me in my shirt in real life, or to see a virtual representation of me in a way that feels like you're actually interacting with the kind of character in the context you would really interact? And I think that's one of those things you just got to try it. Like it's just better. And it is better because it creates this kind of suspension of disbelief that I was talking about. I will say one other thing that's possible just from a pure business model standpoint. Like our technology is really clever, and as the AI has gotten better, a single human can actually run a scene where there are multiple avatars. So let's say you had to do a diversity and inclusion scenario where there's 6 people in a meeting, and you're in the meeting as the learner, and there's a microaggression that occurs in the meeting. You can't that's really hard to coordinate in a virtual real-time 7-minute experience that's available on demand. Can't make that happen, for people. And there's a lot of things like that you just can't do with real humans. I'll give you another one. We do a lot in healthcare, and we do a lot with issues that are super sensitive that people, how do you have a conversation with your teenage daughter about the choices around her medical choices around, fertility and things like that? How do you have a conversation in difficult circumstances in therapy and around addiction and sexual assault? Like, those are conversations that are super stressful. It actually turns out that you can produce them with a level of authenticity and power and impact much easier using a virtual avatar than I can sit here as myself and do it all day long. Those are harder things to pull off with just humans interacting on a Zoom call.
Okay. Just to check, because there's some people in the chat that are asking the same question over and over again. Are you saying that there's a human, in terms of the feedback, because a lot of people are talking about the feedback part and saying that do you have the human doing the feedback after, or is that also the actual the actual role play?
you never meet the sim specialist, right? Like we could talk about that part.
So yeah, I think people got confused. I think people were thinking in the chat earlier by your comments that there's someone after you go for the role play, there's someone in the background who's a human who gives you then the feedback manually. That's not the case.
Remember when I said that you started off and I'm this host avatar? So
I got it. I think they missed the avatar part. So just to clarify, guys, there is no human. There's no human behind it.
No, we don't ever. We never like that. You never see the human. The human could be anywhere in the world, and they are all over the world actually doing this. So we have a big cast of people around the world who are logged in, have been trained and certified to do the scenarios that they're doing, and there's lots of quality control measures around it. But that person, it plays all the characters in the scene, regardless of their gender, age, what ethnicity, what have you, and so they've been there for the whole thing and have experienced it. But when they're giving you feedback, they're giving you the feedback in the form of another character who introduced you to the scenario, and then they're actually role playing all the characters that you interacted with in the scenario, and then they close out the scenario for you. So it's one person behind the scenes at all times.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and having been in it, having gone through it, I can kind of speak to that from experience. That there's almost like a digital host, if you will, right? Like it's a digital host who introduces you to it. Then they tell you, are you ready? And then they disappear, and then you actually interact with these what seems like multiple people, but really it's a computer powered person on the other end that's doing some of that stuff.
Yeah, your colleague just put a good comment in there, Kevin Holland. He said that one actor can control up to 4 avatars simultaneously.
There you go. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, because people are asking in the chat, how do you scale that? I think that's what people's question was. How do you scale this out when you've still got the human behind? So that kind of answers the question for you guys. I hope that answers your question, because I saw a lot of comments coming through a minute ago.
And that's where the AI comes in, because I do want to dig into this a little bit, because it talks about artificial intelligence, and you talked earlier about how the AI is automating some of these things. What are some of those components that the AI is augmenting with the person on the back end that allows them to do some of this in a level of authenticity that makes it feel real?
Well, so the AI does a huge amount of it, because if you have multiple characters, they have to be animate like humans. If you have 5 humans sitting around a table, if it weren't for AI, they would be dead stick figures, right? They would just sit there lame. They breathe, they move, they shift, they react to one another, what someone says at the table. Often they talk amongst themselves. One human could not possibly do all that at one time. The AI makes all of that happen authentically, and is getting smarter and smarter, so that when one character speaks, the other character at the table could be actually reacting to it. And it is only when the learner speaks to address a different character does the human, in a sense, inhabit that character for the spoken dialogue. And then in real time, it morphs the voice to the appropriate voice profile of the other avatar, so that whether it shifts gender or not, a conversation is happening all the time. And increasingly what the AI can do is drive things that neither the learner nor the human actually triggered. So for example, you could have an event because you're in a workplace where things just happen. It's a cafe where, suddenly there's a crowd rushes in, or, it's a fulfillment center where suddenly a truck starts beeping and all kinds of noises go off because there's just general activity. Those are the real life. It's a hospital where an emergency goes off. Those are the real life distractions that cause us to get off our game when we're having a workplace dialogue. And that is all triggered by AI.
Okay. So in an analogy, Chris, you'll probably appreciate this. Oh, looking the wrong way. Other way. Anyway, as a gamer piece, right? So these avatars are almost, I think of, video games where you turn on, you're playing against the computer. So when you're not interacting with an avatar, the AI is kind of running these bots. They're doing these different things. And then when you address or you interact with one, right, then that's where the specialist is kind of taking over that person, almost kind of possessing them in a way and doing that interaction while the AI takes care of those other things.
And everything about their body language starts to be driven by AI as well, so that we increasingly want. I'll give you a thing that we've learned by actually moving from the sort of digital puppeteering, if you will, to the more AI system. It turns out there's a lot of ways that humans physically manifest boredom with the person they're talking about. right? But we found out that when we let humans decide how to manifest boredom by triggering a kind of animation, that like they tend to revert to one or two things. But what we really want learners to be good at is to pick up all of the cues that somebody they're interacting with might be bored or angry or confused or otherwise upset by the way a conversation is going. And it turns out that actually artificial intelligence is better than giving a human control of those emotions. That if you're going to represent the wide range of body language that goes on, AI is better. And so we are now using more AI to trigger the body language of the avatars than letting the humans decide it.
Well, that would make sense, right? Because AI is extremely effective at detecting patterns. Right? It can detect patterns and it can then execute against those patterns. So if, like you said, it can detect, hey, these are the typical patterns we see in human behavior, I imagine it has to be able to do that extremely well, probably better than trying to scale a person up to be like, okay, when you're bored, these are the two things, and here's how you balance that to make it feel authentic.
That's
how,
right.
How advanced is that? Does it look at micro expressions as well? Is it
yes,
detailed?
it's reading we're reading. Yes,
wow.
We're reading.
Well, you can't do that as humans, so we can't read micro expressions. So
right.
That's already where AI wins. Right. And so Drew, in the chat on LinkedIn, that answers your question, I hope, because he said, is the human monitoring the body language or in real time? No, it's not. It's actually the AI.
No, the AI is interpreting you as well. And it's going to give you feedback if you want it. Now, we give people the right to be recorded or not be recorded. And even if their company would love them all be recorded, we still give them the right. We are fully sort of working towards the GDPR requirements around privacy so that everybody gets to decide what data they want. But if you want to get feedback on how you come across, we let you record the thing and get all the feedback you want.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
So with this one, I want to talk a little bit about not necessarily the data privacy piece, but a little bit from a culture standpoint. If you think about it, I think sometimes where we struggle in L&D a little bit is getting people to trust that, hey, this is a learning environment. This is an opportunity that's safe for you to fail and grow, right? That's what we're trying to do, is make mistakes, learn from it, and grow. How is Mursion maybe helping with that, so that maybe in an environment where that's a struggle or people are challenged with that, hey, you're helping them bridge that gap?
Well, so by its very nature, this gets back to actually where we started the conversation about what attracted me to this. Yeah. If you think about the skills that we learn that really have to be demonstrated in real life in order to prove that we've actually learned them, soft skills by definition fit into that, right? But there are a lot of technical skills that until you actually apply them in a real context, you can't actually say that you've learned or mastered them. Like the sales pitch is a classic one. I can memorize the sales pitch, all the time in the world, but until I can show you that I can give it and answer your questions and overcome your objections, I really haven't learned it yet. So the first thing we're doing is giving you a safe, private place to repetitively practice the thing that you think you've learned, but you don't know yet that you've learned until you actually try it over and over again. And letting you do that in a place where you can fail in private is something that I think is missing in a lot of L&D programs, partially because the technology didn't exist to do it. So wouldn't it be nice is every time somebody introduces a new skill that a new piece of knowledge that I have to present to others, and where they're going to ask me questions about it, that I could just sort of kick the tires of that, of doing it, for 7 minutes on my own, get asked hard questions, fail, and just get my shtick down in such a way that I'm really confident. Then there are other skills where we just are we haven't been prepared for them. Like in the medical field, we deal with really serious ethical issues all the time. And we have to explain them to patients and to families. And if you think about the way doctors and nurses are prepared, so much is just the technical knowledge that goes into those ethical decisions, not the incredibly difficult conversations we have to have with people when we explain the consequences of those decisions. And so much of the way the world experiences healthcare is that latter thing, which we get no opportunity to practice. There is a huge need that's not being filled by any other technology right now to give people the opportunities in private, in safety, to practice those kinds of things.
Well, and that's you hit on something that I think I'm very outspoken about it on. I actually just gave a keynote recently that was on this, is that, as an industry, I think historically learning and development has invested. We've over-indexed on content. We've over-indexed on creating content, distributing content, putting content out there and getting in people's hands, and haven't invested as much in how do we give, like you described, people opportunities to put it into practice, because otherwise you end up with the Dunning-Kruger effect. You have people that think they're phenomenal at this stuff and they haven't had a chance to try it, and then you put them in the Shark Tank and they just get eaten alive because, like, well, see, you watched a bunch of TED Talks. That doesn't mean you could deliver one.
Right.
So I think that's where this does kind of help us. But like you said, I think sometimes what I see in our industry is we tend to kind of pick polarizing sides and defend one or the other. And I think it wasn't necessarily we focused on content because we didn't know what we were doing, or we made mistakes. It's just we were limited to the environment we had, and now technology is creating these opportunities for us to be able to do things that just weren't possible. I mean, we just couldn't do it at any sort of speed and scale.
That's right.
I love the
On
idea. Go on, sorry. I'll say I
No.
love the I absolutely love the idea of it personally. I remember how terrified I was when I first got my sales script and I had to go and pitch, my CEO, the sales director the next day. Is terrifying, right? Not having any feedback before going into that real life situation on how good you were, or how, and I used to take it to the point where I would write my script out on paper, then record myself saying it out loud, so I have an audio recording of it. Basically do everything you're doing but manually in order to give myself some type of feedback, where it was listening to myself back or writing it down, etc. So being able to do that in my own comfort of my house, my home, wherever I am, until I'm comfortable is huge. And scalable, more important. Right. And it's also scalable in your organization as well, which is one of the things I love about it. It's scalable and it works with everyone in terms of anytime, anywhere, any device, literally. So.
Well, and I think one of the things you hit on, Chris, with when you were a salesperson, is that if you think about it, and again,
I'm always a salesperson.
I know you're always a salesperson. That's fine.
It never leaves you.
Back when you did that, when you were practicing your script, you were watching it and you were giving feedback to yourself based on what your interpretation was.
What I knew, exactly.
What you knew. There might be things you didn't even know to
which
even
was
be
nothing
able to
back
tell
then.
Yourself. Right. Right. Now you know it all. But
no, I don't know. Never know it all. There's always that unconscious, there's always the unconscious things that you don't know. And that's why I think that's great.
Well, and the element you'd love to add to that is there somebody pushing your buttons while you're doing it? Because of course in real life there's always somebody pushing your buttons. Sometimes you
don't get uncomfortable. That's and that's where you learn the most, and where the growth comes is when you're uncomfortable and you're challenged, right? That's when you really know, do you know your stuff?
Right. That's why
moments.
That's why you let the audience ask questions, right? If they don't push your buttons, you don't really find out if you know what you're talking about.
They're asking a lot of questions, so you have to go back.
They are.
So I want to pull up, I have a follow-up question to this, but I want to pull it up because, again, I think we've talked a lot about it. I'm going to pull up the slide just briefly so people can see what, and this isn't a full-blown demo of it, but so that you can see kind of what one of these environments looks like when you're going into it, and so how you're interacting with this. One of the questions I have as we're looking at this environment, Mark, is, as you think about it, there is always this battle of customization versus off the shelf. You look at some of these simulations and you say, oh, well, we have to do a full custom simulation, or no, we can be off the shelf. Where is Mursion on that? What's your capability and flexibility to, move quick with maybe something off the shelf versus go deep and do a truly custom? And how does that work?
Well, so over the last several years, we've built up an exceptional bank of avatars and sort of environments. You're looking at, two avatars in a residential environment where we train home healthcare workers how to come into the homes of different people and have difficult conversations that they might have to have about a home healthcare regimen that they're going through. Okay. But whether it's an office place, a factory floor, a medical center, or a home, we've now built up a lot of environments and a wide range of age, gender, ethnicity, combinations of avatars. So if you want to take any of them, you could start tomorrow with a set of simulations. We have a bank of scenarios that fall into many of the areas we've been talking talking about right now. Leadership development, certainly, where listening skills, diversity and inclusion, de-escalating conflict are all incredibly relevant. A lot of healthcare contexts where you're having difficult conversations about medical treatments or breaking good or bad news, more often than not bad, to the families of and patients. A lot of customer service. Just, I'm in a hospital. I'm in a hotel. I'm in a restaurant. I'm in a retail facility where some customer is just being a schmuck, and I have got to figure out a way to professionally de-escalate them and move to the next customer. And where brand is at risk, if I revert to my inner, obnoxiousness and say, get the hell out of my store, where that's just not tolerant. Those kinds of things, we are ready to go, can sort of turn a key and start. But invariably, sometimes people come to us and say, it's got to look like my workplace, or it's got to be this avatar. And that takes a little bit of custom development. But the rest of it, and short amounts of time, I can give you a case study of an example, sort of soup to nuts, of where someone came in and did something at scale with huge impact that involved customization, just so you have a feel for it. In November, about a year or so ago, Best Western came to us to train every front desk clerk at every Best Western hotel in the United States. They wanted they wanted folks that deal with the kind of business traveler who runs in and finds the following things we've all kind of run into in life in travel. 1, my room's not ready. 2, there's somebody loud in the room next door. 3, the internet doesn't work. Like, think of all the things that go wrong when you stay and you travel and business travel. They wanted somebody who could calmly solve the problem, give them the appropriate rewards or whatnot, and de-escalate the conflict. We went through, we signed up in November. We built them the virtual lobby and avatars. By January, had trained a team of our SIM specialists to deliver. By mid-February, we were ready to launch all of those scenarios. And by June, we had trained every front desk clerk at Best Western. And Best Western has written up a case study that shows that for the first time, they had a material increase in the Net Promoter Score that they received from the people that experienced service at their front desk clerk at all of their properties nationwide. And they've correlated the increase in Net Promoter Score to increased revenue at those properties. I mean, it's their case study. Like, that is a soup to nuts version of an engagement that we've done. And what it takes when we even have to customize. That could have gone faster had the customization not been necessary.
Okay. And that was one of the questions I had, and you answered it well there, because I think sometimes when we look at experiences like that in L&D, we're challenged with doing it at scale, right? We can do it, but maybe we can only do it for a small group of people or a specialized group of people over here. We just can't hit tens of thousands of people over a few months. It's not scalable. And it sounds like you have that capability and capacity to help organizations with that.
Yes. Yes, I mean, we're doing things in the hundreds of thousands of learners now. So scale is not the issue. Scale is actually the solution for us. It's easier for us to do something on a large scale. The harder things to do are little niche specialty projects for a small number of people.
Okay. So how about this? On that topic, I've got 2 things that come to mind. First of all, one, when you look at, let's talk about the niche and customization versus things like that, is in those situations where maybe you truly do need to go deep and it's only something that internally you can do, or maybe you really need the true internal subject matter expertise. Is there an ability for, say, somebody from your company to be skilled up and drive one of those SIMs? So maybe that person could go deeper than maybe a SIM specialist might be able to do. Is that a possibility?
Yes, and that's a very good question, and we do have clients that do that now. So, and we envision this being a platform that we turn over to any company that wants to do it. So, as it turns out, there are a lot of people that are already in the employ of organizations that are perfectly capable of being what we call simulation specialists. We often recruit people out of those organizations. We train them and we deploy the software internally, where everything they do is entirely private within the organization. So we would have no interaction with them at all. We have a lot of large organizations that have come to us to do that. In some cases, they go outside. There are so many talented people that have theater or improv backgrounds who are so excited at the opportunity to do this work. Many of them like to engage in performance work at night. But if you think about business hours, there's not a whole lot of theater happening, on 5 days a week during the business hours of 9 to 5. And those people need something to do, and this is real performance, and they love it. And so finding them is not difficult, training them is not hard, and this system is super easy for them to use. And so you are absolutely right to suggest it. You don't have to have us do it. We'd happily put you in our business and let you go do it for yourself.
Okay. Because that's helpful, because again, I think sometimes there are situations where maybe there's a level of competitive intelligence or data privacy that an organization may not necessarily, regardless of how secure your stuff is, they may say, we feel more comfortable keeping that behind our closed doors. So that's good to know that's possible. The other one I was going to ask is, right, you look on a global scale. I think this is a challenge for learning and development leaders in general. When you have large global organizations, you're dealing with nuances in cultures and countries that you maybe can, the days of all you needed to do was translate your content. And that wasn't even easy. I mean, that wasn't even easy. So anybody who's been in the space knows that's no small task.
Still wasn't easy.
It's still not. Yeah. But now you talk about, this experience stuff and all the cultural. Are you able to do that, to help with, hey, okay, if we've got a region over here or a country over here, are you able to help with that so that instead of people having to try and navigate all that territory, can you support them through that?
We are working with companies like Coca-Cola that are global. We are working in most countries in the world doing this. And we are building up partners that cover cultures where it's hard to find expertise in the United States. So, we have centers in London and Asia and the Middle East and in Africa where we can draw the human expertise we need to deliver compelling experiences that work in those cultures. For global corporations, it's not actually as hard as it sounds, because there is a sort of they tend to have a more homogenized global approach. They do it in English, first of all, although we do it in other languages as well. Obviously, the avatars have to look of the country they're speaking and the language they're speaking. But we have big partners in Mexico, for example, in Latin America, that are doing this for themselves in some cases. When language is a big obstacle, they often go down the software license route that you alluded to earlier. But we have folks delivering in languages across the globe.
Okay. So I think, that's, like I said, I think there's, and I'm sensitive to it because having been in a lot of U.S. organizations running L&D on the U.S. side, one of the things I'm always sensitive to is, when you think about an organization, the last thing you want to do is you're rolling things out globally is have everything feel like it's U.S. centric. It's coming from corporate, and it's kind of a push down, and being able to kind of tap into that gives it a level of authenticity that overcomes that.
I think that's almost essential, the way that we're moving forward, that you have that. It can no longer be that. As well. Just out of curiosity, as the technology gets better, are you looking to get to the point where you can't distinguish the role play versus reality? Because if you look at some of the games that are out, that I personally play and that are out now, you almost can't tell, or even the movies, let's say, you can't tell between, is it actually a real person or is it? But, is that the plan for, or would you always keep it so you're very clear that that's actually not a human right there?
So there's
just out of interest.
We have a whole board of psychologists who advise us on this very issue. And to be fair, the science is so those films that are doing that right now, where they are pushing the limit of reality with essentially virtual reality only in film, that's computer generated graphics. I mean, they're really quite extraordinary, and they're blending and sort of bending our definition of what is real and not real And we're trying to decide whether or not that is comforting or discomforting. And
that's what I was. That was my question, because I don't know if that makes it more or less comforting knowing that it's actually.
It's a good question. All we know so far, like we know that moving from cartoony characters towards more realistic characters has been the right thing to do. Okay. Whether we move to the full hyperreal where you really couldn't tell whether I'm the avatar or I'm Mark, that right now that we haven't decided. We're just incrementally moving forward and testing and getting advice as we do. We do a lot of studies. We work with a lot of research organizations that are doing research with us on the technology as we're deploying the technology on subjects like this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think personally in gaming, I think there's been a lot of research that you are engaged. I could say personally, actually, forget about the research. I'm personally more engaged in the experience with those, hyper realistic games. I think most people would say the same thing.
Yeah, it's super interesting
as well. But from psychological point of view?
Yeah. So the last question I have, because we've only got a couple minutes left, and this is one I think that's really important for L&D to always consider, because it can be easy to hear about these new techs and the use cases and get excited and be like, oh yeah, let's do it, without really thinking through what are some of the implications or the things that you need to do on the L&D side to be prepared to make this a success. Because I have to imagine it's not just you flip a switch and magically Mursion fixes all your problems. I mean, that's just not realistic. So what are some of those things that you would say, hey, if this is something that you're looking at pursuing, these are some steps to take to prepare your org, your people, things to make the most of this?
So the first thing is that you never heard me describe us as a soup to nuts training program. We don't teach you the leadership skill. We give you the opportunity to practice the leadership skill. So we need to be yoked to some other training initiative, whether it's face-to-face or online, in an appropriate way. What I think will happen, and I think the learning that we will have with our clients, is where does simulation fit into most forms of learning? For the most part, all L&D executives are looking for ways to demonstrate and practice the skills that they want their executives to have, right? So the question is, where appropriately does simulation fit into that? That's certainly one. Two is, I think that it's just different, and that it's a live experience, and most e-learning is asynchronous these days. And so you think about all the scheduling and logistics of a synchronous experience as opposed to an asynchronous experience. That's certainly something that I think we want to address. We are increasingly becoming on demand, so that we right now work through the scheduling of when we do simulations with a little bit of notice. As in the next year or so, we will be very close to either within 24-hour notice or just on demand. This is where volume really is our solution. And then I would say the other thing that is a big shift, there is one thing in L&D that I regret, which is it has to do with what the bosses impose on the L&D executives, which is training is one and done. Take the course. There's a presumption that you know the thing at the end of the course. Behavioral change, for anybody who's tried to diet or exercise, we all know, like, you don't. It's
just because you know.
Yeah, it's not one and done. And so it is with human skills. I am not going to become empathetic because I do a single sim. We have done a lot of research on what it takes to move behavior, and we actually have a real body of literature that supports that after only 4 simulations, we can really start to see people changing, but they don't change fundamentally unless they keep at it, in the same way that I am not going to lose all of that Captain Crunch I ate for breakfast in my girth by simply running once today, right? Okay. I got to keep at it. So that's a change too.
So fundamentally, and this will kind of be my closing thoughts on this, is all the good principles we know as learning and development professionals still play in. We can't just assume that the tech is going to come solve that for us. We still need to set the table, prepare the organization, do all these good things, but Mursion can help assist in some of those challenges and help us better index on experiences versus just content.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, we're going to wrap. We're at the top of the hour. For people who are interested in learning more about Mursion, I would highly recommend try it out. Reach out to me if you want. You can reach out, Mark. They can probably reach you or anybody over at the Mursion team.
Yeah, come on our website, get a demo right away, see it. You got to do it in order to really experience it. You'll have all these questions will get answered once you try it. And if not, we'll answer them and hopefully work with you to get you something you like.
All right. Well, awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Chris. Thanks for joining me again on another show. For those of you watching, be sure to tune in and subscribe to the podcast, to all that good stuff. And we'll be here again next week, same time. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you both.
Fantastic. See you later,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye.